I discovered the first anonymous complaint taped to my mailbox on a Tuesday morning in April, and I knew exactly who had written it even though it was unsigned. The note demanded in sharp, aggressive handwriting that I immediately remove the dangerous insect colonies from my backyard before they destroyed property values and threatened the safety of children in our peaceful Colorado Springs neighborhood. I crumpled the paper in my fist and looked 3 houses down where I could see the silhouette of someone standing behind lace curtains, watching me. My name is Yannick Lawson, and I had moved to the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision exactly 8 months earlier after my divorce from my ex-wife Sarah. The 3-bedroom ranch house with its quarter-acre lot had seemed perfect for starting fresh. I worked remotely as a software engineer, which gave me plenty of time to pursue my passion for beekeeping. I had started with honeybees as a hobby 5 years ago, and it had grown into something that gave me real purpose. I currently maintained 4 healthy hives in my backyard, each colony thriving and producing beautiful honey while pollinating every flowering plant within a 3-mile radius. I walked back inside my house and tossed the note onto my kitchen counter. My black Labrador, Murphy, looked up at me with concerned eyes as if he could sense my irritation. I scratched behind his ears and tried to let it go. The note was probably just some neighbor who did not understand bees and thought they were dangerous. I would ignore it and move on with my day. But then my phone rang that afternoon. The number showed up as the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association office. I answered cautiously. "Hello, is this Yannick Lawson?" A woman's voice asked in a tone that managed to sound both syrupy sweet and hostile at the same time. "Yes, this is Yannick." "Wonderful. This is Patricia Hendrickson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I wanted to reach out personally regarding a concern that has been brought to our attention about your property." I leaned against my kitchen counter and braced myself. What concern would that be? "Well, Mr. Lawson, we have received multiple complaints about bee colonies being kept on your property. As I am sure you are aware, maintaining commercial livestock or agricultural operations is strictly prohibited under our community covenants and restrictions." "They are not commercial," I said firmly. "They are a personal hobby, 4 beehives for my own use." "Be that as it may, the covenants are quite clear. No livestock, poultry, or insects may be kept on residential properties except for common household pets. I am going to need you to remove these hives within the next 2 weeks." I felt my jaw clench. "With all due respect, Mrs. Hendrickson, honeybees are not livestock. They are essential pollinators, and there are actually state laws protecting beekeepers' rights." I checked all the local ordinances before I installed my hives. "Our HOA covenants supersede local ordinances, Mr. Lawson. I suggest you review your paperwork. You signed an agreement when you purchased your home. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, but those bees need to go. I will be sending you a formal notice in writing. Have a blessed day." She hung up before I could respond. I spent the next hour digging through my filing cabinet until I found my copy of the HOA covenants and restrictions. The document was 47 pages of dense legal language covering everything from approved paint colors to rules about parking recreational vehicles. I finally found the section Patricia had referenced. It stated that no property owner could keep livestock, poultry, rabbits, or other animals except for common household pets without express written permission from the HOA board. It did not specifically mention bees or insects. I took photos of the relevant pages and sent them to my friend Marcus, who was a real estate attorney in Denver. He called me back within an hour. "Yeah, this is pretty vague language," Marcus said. "The question is whether bees count as animals under this covenant." Legally, insects are classified as animals from a biological standpoint, but they are typically treated differently under agricultural and property law. So where does that leave me? I asked. Honestly, gray area. You could argue that bees are not what the covenant intended to prohibit. These clauses are usually written to prevent people from keeping goats or chickens or pigs. Things that make noise, create odors, and genuinely impact neighbors. Bees are different. That is what I thought. They barely know the hives are even there. I keep them in the far corner of my backyard, away from the property line. Has anyone actually been bothered by the bees? Stings, swarms, anything like that? Not a single incident. My bees are gentle Italian honeybees. They are more interested in flowers than people. Then you might have a case for selective enforcement or unreasonable interpretation of the covenants. But here is the thing, Yannick. Fighting an HOA is expensive and exhausting. You need to decide if this hill is worth dying on. I looked out my kitchen window at the 4 white Langstroth hives sitting peacefully beside my garden. I had painted them myself, decorated them with colorful designs. I knew every colony had named each queen. Losing them would be like losing family. It is worth it, I said. 3 days later, I received the formal written notice from the HOA. It arrived via certified mail and included not just the demand to remove my beehives, but also a threat of daily fines starting at $50 per day if I did not comply within 14 days. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendrickson in aggressive, swooping handwriting. That same afternoon, I had my first in-person encounter with Patricia. I was in my driveway working on my truck when a silver Lexus SUV pulled up and parked at an angle that blocked my driveway. A woman in her early 50s stepped out, wearing a white visor, expensive athleisure wear, and oversized sunglasses. Her blonde hair was cut in that severe asymmetrical bob that seemed to be the official hairstyle of difficult people everywhere. Yannick Lawson. She called out as she marched across my lawn, ignoring the walkway entirely. "Can I help you?" I asked, setting down my wrench. "I certainly hope so. I am Patricia Hendrickson. We spoke on the phone about your little bee situation." "They are not a situation. They are beehives and they are perfectly legal." She pulled her sunglasses down and looked at me with sharp blue eyes. "Legal according to whom? Did you even read the notice we sent you?" "I read it. I also read the covenants and I consulted with an attorney." "Your interpretation is questionable at best." Her face flushed red. "Questionable? I have been the president of this HOA for 6 years, young man. I think I know how to interpret our own rules. Those hives are a nuisance and a danger, and they will be removed one way or another." "They are not dangerous. Honeybees are gentle and essential for the environment. They pollinate gardens all through this neighborhood. Everyone here benefits from them." "I do not care if they tap dance and grant wishes," Patricia snapped. "They are against the rules and you are going to remove them, or I will make your life a living hell. We will fine you into bankruptcy if we have to." "Then I guess I will see you in court," I said calmly, even though my heart was pounding. Patricia stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You really want to go to war over some bugs? I will bury you in legal fees. I will have liens placed on your property. I will make sure every single day you live in this neighborhood is miserable until you pack up and leave. Is that what you want?" "What I want is to be left alone to pursue a legal hobby on my own property," I said. "Now please get off my lawn." She stared at me for a long moment, her jaw working as if she was grinding her teeth. Then she spun on her heel and stalked back to her Lexus. She peeled out with enough force to leave tire marks on the street. Murphy had been watching the whole confrontation from the front window. When I came back inside, he pressed against my leg as if to offer comfort. I sat down on my couch and tried to figure out my next move. Marcus had warned me that fighting an HOA was expensive, but I had some savings, and I was not about to be bullied by someone like Patricia Hendrickson. I spent that evening researching Colorado beekeeping laws, and was pleased to discover that the state actually had strong protections for beekeepers. Colorado Revised Statutes Section 356103 specifically stated that beekeeping was an agricultural operation and that local governments could not prohibit it. There were some reasonable restrictions about hive placement and number of colonies, but nothing I was violating. The next morning, I called the Colorado Department of Agriculture and spoke with a woman named Jennifer Castellano who worked in their apiary inspection program. I explained my situation, and she listened patiently. "So your HOA is trying to claim that your bees violate their covenants?" Jennifer asked. "Exactly. They are threatening daily fines starting next week." "Well, Mr. Lawson, I have to tell you that we deal with this situation more often than you would think. A lot of people do not understand that beekeeping is protected agriculture in Colorado. Let me ask you some questions about your operation." She went through a detailed checklist asking about how many hives I had, where they were located, how far they were from property lines, whether I had experienced any swarm issues or aggressive behavior. I answered each question thoroughly. "You are well within compliance for everything," Jennifer said finally. "In fact, you are exceeding best practices in several areas. Most beekeepers do not keep their hives as far from property boundaries as you do. Now, as for your HOA, the state position is that beekeeping is a protected agricultural activity. HOA covenants cannot override state law when it comes to agricultural operations. So they cannot force me to remove my hives, not based on what you have told me. I would be happy to send you a letter stating that your operation is in full compliance with state regulations and that beekeeping is protected under Colorado law. You can provide that to your HOA. I can also send a letter directly to them if needed." Relief washed over me. "That would be incredibly helpful. Thank you so much." "No problem at all. We want to support beekeepers. You are doing important work. Email me your information and the HOA contact details, and I will get those letters out by the end of the week." I hung up feeling genuinely optimistic for the first time since this whole mess started. The state agricultural department was on my side. Surely that would be enough to make Patricia back down. I was very wrong. The letters from the Colorado Department of Agriculture arrived 5 days later, just 1 day before the HOA's deadline. Jennifer had been thorough and professional. The letter to me stated clearly that my beekeeping operation was in full compliance with all state regulations, and that beekeeping was a protected agricultural activity under Colorado law. The letter to the HOA was even more pointed, explaining that HOA covenants could not prohibit legal agricultural operations, and that attempting to do so could result in legal liability. I made copies of both letters and hand-delivered them to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the neighborhood pool and clubhouse. The office manager, a timid woman named Carol, accepted the documents with nervous hands. "I will make sure Mrs. Hendrickson gets these," she said quietly. "Thank you, Carol. I hope this resolves everything." She gave me a look that suggested she knew better, but she did not say anything else. Patricia called me less than 2 hours later. I could hear the rage in her voice before she even finished saying hello. "You think you are clever, Mr. Lawson, sending us letters from some bureaucrat who does not know the first thing about property law." "The Department of Agriculture knows quite a bit about agricultural law, actually," I said. "And beekeeping is protected. Your covenants cannot prohibit it. We will see about that. I have already forwarded these ridiculous letters to our HOA attorney. We will be filing for an injunction to have those hives removed, and we will be assessing fines starting tomorrow as originally planned. You are now officially in violation, and you are going to pay for every single day you remain in violation. Patricia, this is ridiculous. The state says I am legal. I do not care what the state says. You are in my neighborhood under my HOA, and you will follow my rules. $50 per day starting tomorrow. That is $350 per week, Mr. Lawson. Over $18,000 per year. How long can you afford to be stubborn? She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Marcus and told him what was happening. He let out a long sigh. Okay, so she is going nuclear. Not unexpected with someone like this. Here is what you need to know. She can assess the fines, but she cannot collect them without going through a legal process. If you do not pay, they will have to file a lien against your property and eventually take you to court to foreclose on that lien. That process takes time, and it gives you opportunity to fight back. What should I do? First, do not pay any fines. Paying them would be admitting you are in violation. Second, we need to file a lawsuit against the HOA for selective enforcement and violation of state law. We will argue that the covenants are being interpreted in an overly broad and unreasonable way, and that the HOA is violating your rights under Colorado agricultural law. How much is this going to cost me? I will be honest with you, probably between $5,000 and $10,000 if it goes to trial. Maybe more if it gets really contentious. But if we win, we can potentially recover our legal fees from the HOA. These cases set precedent, and I think you have a strong argument. I thought about my savings account. I had about $30,000 set aside, money I had been saving to eventually buy a small farm property where I could expand my beekeeping operation. Spending a third of that on legal fees was not ideal, but I was not going to let Patricia Hendrickson bully me into submission. Let us do it, I said. File the lawsuit. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated in ways I could never have imagined. True to her word, Patricia began assessing daily fines against my property. I received itemized bills via certified mail every 3 days, each one showing the accumulating total. After 10 days, I supposedly owed $500. I did not pay a penny. But Patricia was not satisfied with just financial warfare. She began a campaign to turn the neighborhood against me. She sent out a mass email to all HOA members warning them about the dangerous bee infestation at my property and claiming that I was putting children and pets at risk. The email included several stock photos of bee swarms and aggressive wasps, none of which had anything to do with my peaceful honeybee colonies. She organized a special HOA meeting to discuss the bee problem and made it clear that all neighbors were expected to attend. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the clubhouse. I debated whether I should attend, but Marcus advised me to go and to stay calm no matter what happened. Let them show their hand, he said. Take notes. Record it if Colorado is a one-party consent state, which it is. Document everything. If they harass you or make false statements, that all helps our case. So on Thursday evening, I walked into the clubhouse with my phone set to record audio in my shirt pocket. The room was packed with about 40 residents, most of whom I had never met. Patricia stood at the front beside a projector screen, wearing a navy blue pantsuit that made her look like she was about to prosecute a murder trial. She saw me enter and her eyes narrowed, but she did not say anything. I took a seat in the back row and waited. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her presentation. She had created a PowerPoint slideshow titled "The Bee Crisis at 447 Meadowbrook Lane." My address. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Patricia began. "We are here to discuss a serious situation that threatens the safety and property values of our entire community. As many of you know, one of our residents has decided to operate a commercial bee farm in direct violation of our HOA covenants." "It is not a commercial farm," I called out from the back. "It is 4 hives for personal use." Patricia's face tightened. "Please hold your comments until the end, Mr. Lawson. This is not a debate." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a close-up photo of a bee swarm that definitely was not from my property. Bees are dangerous insects that can swarm, attack, and even kill people who are allergic to their stings. Children playing in yards near these hives are at constant risk. Property values in the immediate area have already begun to decline as potential buyers learn about this hazard. "That is completely false," I said, standing up. "Honeybees are not aggressive. They only sting when directly threatened, and even then they die afterwards, so they avoid it. There has not been a single incident involving my bees. Not one sting, not one swarm, nothing." "You are out of order, Mr. Lawson," Patricia snapped. "No, you are out of order," I shot back. "You are spreading misinformation and trying to manipulate people into supporting your personal vendetta against me. Those photos are not even from my property. That is fear-mongering, pure and simple." Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. A man in his 60s raised his hand. "I live 2 houses down from Yannick," he said. "My name is Robert Chen. I have never had any problem with his bees. In fact, my tomato garden has never been better since he moved in. I think this whole thing is being blown way out of proportion." "Thank you, Robert," Patricia said icily, "but you are not an expert on bees or property law. Our HOA attorney has confirmed that these hives are in violation." "Actually," I said, pulling papers from my bag, "the Colorado Department of Agriculture has confirmed that my hives are completely legal and that HOA covenants cannot prohibit protected agricultural activities. I have the letters right here if anyone wants to see them." I held up the documents. Several people craned their necks to look. Patricia's face was turning purple. "Those letters are irrelevant. Our covenants are a private contract that all residents agreed to. The state cannot override private contracts." "That is not true when the contract attempts to prohibit legally protected activities," I said. "This is well-established law." A woman in her 40s stood up. "I am a real estate agent, and I have to say that I have never heard of bees affecting property values negatively. If anything, neighborhoods with active pollinators and gardens tend to sell better. I think we need more information before we make any rash decisions." "Are you calling me rash?" Patricia demanded. "I am saying we should slow down and make sure we are doing the right thing," the woman replied calmly. The meeting devolved from there. About half the room seemed to support Patricia, mostly people who did not really understand bees and were scared by her presentation. The other half seemed skeptical of her claims or openly supportive of my right to keep bees. It turned into a shouting match, with Patricia repeatedly trying to call for order while people argued over each other. Finally, Robert Chen stood up and raised his voice above the chaos. "Why don't we just take a vote? All in favor of forcing Yannick to remove his bees, raise your hands." About 20 hands went up, mostly from people who lived on the opposite end of the neighborhood and had probably never even seen my property. All opposed, about 15 hands went up. And abstaining, 5 more hands. Patricia looked triumphant. "There you have it. The community has spoken. The bees must go." "That is not how this works," I said. This is not about popularity. This is about whether your interpretation of the covenants is legal and the state says it is not. I will see you in court. I walked out of the clubhouse while Patricia sputtered behind me. My hands were shaking with adrenaline, but I felt oddly empowered. I had stood my ground and some of my neighbors had actually supported me. When I got home, I emailed Marcus the audio recording from the meeting along with notes about everything Patricia had said. He called me an hour later. "This is gold," Marcus said. "She made several demonstrably false statements. The photos she used are not from your property. Her claims about property values are baseless. The fact that she is trying to use community pressure to force you out shows this is personal, not legitimate HOA business. We can use all of this. So, what happens now? Now we wait for the HOA attorney to make their move. They will either back down once they realize they are on shaky legal ground, or they will dig in and we will go to court. Based on what you have told me about Patricia, I am guessing it is the latter." Marcus was right. A week later, I was served with legal papers. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was filing for a preliminary injunction to force the immediate removal of my beehives pending resolution of their complaints. They claimed the hives constituted a nuisance, violated covenants, and created a danger to the community. Marcus filed our response within days. We argued that the HOA's interpretation of their covenants was overly broad, that beekeeping was a protected agricultural activity under state law, that the HOA was engaged in selective and vindictive enforcement, and that there was no evidence of any actual nuisance or danger. We attached the letters from the Department of Agriculture, statements from supportive neighbors, and my detailed records showing there had never been a single incident involving my bees. We also filed a counterclaim against the HOA for harassment, violation of state law, and demanding that the fines be voided. The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, the fines continued to accumulate on paper, and Patricia's harassment campaign intensified. She sent out another mass email claiming that I was putting profits over people by refusing to relocate my commercial operation. She started driving slowly past my house at odd hours, sometimes stopping to take photos. She filed a complaint with the county about my hives, which resulted in an inspector coming out. The inspector spent 20 minutes examining my setup, chatted with me about bee breeds, complimented my hive management, and filed a report stating that everything was in perfect compliance with all regulations. Patricia also convinced several neighbors to file formal complaints with the HOA about alleged bee problems. I discovered this when Carol, the office manager, sheepishly called to tell me. "I am required to notify you about the complaints," Carol said quietly. "But between you and me, I think most of them are bogus. Mrs. Henderson from 3 streets over claims a bee flew into her car and she almost crashed. She wants you to pay for her emotional distress." "A bee flew into her car," I repeated incredulously. "So I am responsible for every insect in a 5-mile radius now. I am just telling you what she claimed. There are 4 other complaints too. Mr. Peters says bees are getting into his pool. The Johnsons claim their daughter got stung in their backyard. Mrs. Carmichael says the buzzing keeps her awake at night. And someone who submitted an anonymous complaint says their dog is traumatized by bees." I rubbed my temples. This was absurd. "Carol, my hives are in the corner of my backyard, at least 50 feet from any property line. The chances that bees from my specific hives are causing any of these supposed problems are basically zero. There are wild bees all over this neighborhood, not to mention wasps and hornets that people constantly confuse with honeybees." "I know," Carol said sympathetically. But I have to forward all complaints to the board. Mrs. Hendrickson is building a file. Of course she is. Thanks for the heads up, Carol. After that call, I decided to go on the offensive. I contacted my beekeeping association and asked for help. Within a week, I had written statements from 3 experienced Colorado beekeepers, all of them explaining that my operation was small, well managed, and posed zero threat to neighbors. One of them, a retired biology professor named Dr. Elizabeth Abernathy, even offered to testify in court if needed about the benefits and safety of backyard beekeeping. I also started documenting everything. I set up a security camera pointed at my hives and backyard. I photographed my bees every few days, showing them peacefully going about their business. I kept detailed logs of hive inspections, honey production, and bee behavior. I wanted evidence that my colonies were healthy, gentle, and absolutely not the menace Patricia was claiming. The stress of the situation was taking a toll, though. I found myself constantly anxious, jumping every time I got an email or saw a car slow down near my house. I lost weight. I was not sleeping well. My work performance started to suffer because I was spending so much mental energy on this battle. Murphy seemed to sense my distress. He stuck close to me constantly, pressing his warm body against my leg when I sat down, following me from room to room. Dogs have that incredible ability to know when their humans are struggling, and Murphy was no exception. One evening about 3 weeks before the court hearing, I was sitting on my back deck watching the bees return to their hives for the night. It was that golden hour right before sunset when everything gets bathed in warm light. The bees were doing their orientation flights, circling the hives in lazy figure eights before settling in. It was peaceful and beautiful, and for a moment I forgot about all the legal drama. Then I heard a voice from the other side of my fence. "They really are beautiful, are not they?" I looked over to see my neighbor to the east, a woman in her 30s named Emma Atwood. She had moved in about the same time I did, and we had exchanged friendly waves but never really talked. "They really are," I said. "You can come around if you want a closer look." She appeared at my gate a moment later. I invited her onto my deck and we stood together watching the bees. "I heard about all the trouble with the HOA," Emma said. "Patricia is being ridiculous. I wanted you to know that not everyone agrees with her." "I appreciate that." "It has been pretty stressful." "I can imagine. For what it is worth, I love having your bees next door. My flower garden has gone crazy this year. I have more blooms than I have ever had before. And I am a nurse, so I know a little bit about allergies and anaphylaxis. The risk from honeybees is way overblown. You are far more likely to die from a fall or a car accident than a bee sting. Try telling that to Patricia." Emma laughed. "Patricia Hendrickson is the worst thing about this neighborhood. She has been terrorizing people for years. Someone really needs to stand up to her. I am glad you are fighting this, even if it costs me thousands of dollars." "Sometimes principles are worth the cost," Emma said. "Plus, I do not think you are going to lose." "I read the letters from the Agriculture Department that you shared at that community meeting. You have state law on your side. Patricia just cannot stand being told no." We talked for another hour about beekeeping, the neighborhood, and our respective experiences with the HOA. It turned out that Patricia had fined Emma once for hanging a wreath on her door that was not on the approved decorations list. Emma had ultimately caved and removed the wreath, but she was still bitter about it. "That is her pattern," Emma explained. "She picks someone to target, usually someone new to the neighborhood who does not know all the insane rules. She harasses them until they either submit completely or move away. She gets off on the power trip." "Well, I am not moving," I said firmly. "Good. Do not let her win." That conversation with Emmer recharged my resolve. I was not just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting against a bully who had been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. If I could beat Patricia, maybe it would open the door for other residents to stand up to her unreasonable demands. The week before the hearing, Marcus and I met to prepare. He had compiled an impressive array of evidence supporting our case. We had the letters from the Department of Agriculture, the inspector's report from the county, statements from supportive neighbors, my detailed logs showing no incidents, expert testimony lined up from Dr. Abernathy, and documentation of Patricia's harassment campaign. The HOA's case is weak, Marcus explained. Their attorney has basically just restated the covenant language and claimed you are violating it. They have not provided any evidence of actual harm or nuisance. The complaints from neighbors are vague and unsubstantiated. Nobody has medical records from bee stings. Nobody has property damage. It is all hypothetical fear. What are our chances? I asked. In court, I would say 70-30 in our favor, maybe 80-20. The law is on our side. But HOA cases can be unpredictable because some judges are very deferential to private covenant enforcement. Still, I think we have got this. The preliminary injunction hearing was held on a Thursday morning in El Paso County District Court. I wore my best suit and tried to project confidence even though my stomach was in knots. Patricia showed up with the HOA's attorney, a middle-aged man named Douglas Freeman, who looked like he charged $400 an hour. Patricia sat in the gallery wearing a severe black dress and too much perfume. Judge Martin Rodriguez presided. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and an expression that suggested he did not suffer fools gladly. He reviewed the case materials while we all waited in silence. This is a preliminary injunction hearing regarding beehives, Judge Rodriguez said finally, looking up over his reading glasses. Mr. Freeman, you are seeking to force the removal of 4 bee colonies from Mr. Lawson's property, pending resolution of the underlying HOA dispute. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Freeman said, standing. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA covenants clearly prohibit the keeping of livestock and animals other than household pets. Mr. Lawson's beehives violate this covenant. They pose a nuisance and danger to neighbors, particularly children and individuals with allergies. We are seeking immediate removal of the hives to prevent irreparable harm to the community. Mr. Chen, the judge said, turning to Marcus, your response. Marcus stood and launched into our argument. He was articulate and persuasive, walking the judge through Colorado's agricultural protection laws, the specific language of the covenant and why it should not be interpreted to include bees, and the complete lack of any evidence of actual harm or danger. Your Honor, this is not about protecting the community, Marcus said. This is about an HOA president who does not like my client and is abusing her authority to harass him. The State Department of Agriculture has confirmed that Mr. Lawson's beekeeping operation is legal and complies with all regulations. Honeybees are protected pollinators, not dangerous pests. Granting this injunction would violate state policy favoring agricultural operations and would reward the HOA's unreasonable interpretation of their own covenants. The judge listened intently, occasionally making notes. Then he started asking questions. Mr. Freeman, what evidence do you have of actual harm caused by these bees? Freeman shuffled his papers. We have multiple complaints from residents, Your Honor. Concerns about safety, fears about allergic reactions, reports of bees in yards and pools. Concerns and fears are not evidence of harm, Judge Rodriguez said. Has anyone been stung by bees from Mr. Lawson's hive specifically? Has anyone required medical treatment? Is there any documented property damage? Not yet, Your Honor, but the risk is substantial. We are seeking to prevent harm before it occurs. Mr. Chen, what is your response to the covenant language? It does say no animals except household pets. Marcus was ready for this. Your Honor, that language is typically understood to mean livestock animals, chickens, goats, pigs, rabbits. Animals that create noise, odor, waste, and require significant space. Insects are not what the drafters of this covenant had in mind. Moreover, Colorado law specifically protects beekeeping as an agricultural operation. HOA covenants cannot override state law in this area. Judge Rodriguez leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Patricia in the gallery. Mrs. Hendrickson, I assume you are the HOA president. Patricia stood quickly. Yes, Your Honor. I am Patricia Hendrickson, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Have you personally observed these beehives or interacted with the bees? I have seen the hives from the street, Your Honor, but I have not gone into Mr. Lawson's backyard. So you have no first-hand knowledge of whether they are well maintained or pose any actual danger. Patricia hesitated. I am relying on the concerns of residents and my responsibility to enforce our covenants, Your Honor. I see. And are you aware of Colorado's laws protecting agricultural operations, including beekeeping? Our attorney has advised us that our covenants are a private contract and take precedence, Your Honor. Judge Rodriguez turned back to Freeman. Is that your position, Mr. Freeman? That private covenants override state law? Freeman cleared his throat. In general, covenants are enforced as written, Your Honor, but we acknowledge that there may be some tension between the covenant language and state agricultural policy. Some tension, the judge repeated dryly. Mr. Freeman, I have reviewed the letters from the Colorado Department of Agriculture that were submitted as exhibits. The state has made it quite clear that Mr. Lawson's beekeeping operation is legal and that HOA covenants cannot prohibit protected agricultural activities. Are you asking me to rule contrary to the position of the state agency with expertise in this area? We are asking you to enforce the covenant that all residents agreed to when they purchased their properties, Your Honor. The judge made a few more notes, then looked up. Here is my ruling. The motion for preliminary injunction is denied. Mr. Lawson may continue to maintain his beehives pending resolution of the underlying case. The evidence before me shows that these bees are well managed, legal under state law, and have caused no documented harm to anyone. The HOA's interpretation of their covenant is questionable at best, and likely conflicts with Colorado law. If the HOA wishes to pursue this matter further, they will need to do so through a full trial where actual evidence can be presented. But based on what I have seen today, I would strongly encourage the parties to settle this dispute and avoid wasting everyone's time and money. Is there anything else? No, Your Honor, Marcus said, fighting to keep the grin off his face. Nothing further, Your Honor, Freeman said through clenched teeth. Then we are adjourned. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Marcus and I shook hands, and I thanked him profusely. Patricia stormed out of the courtroom without looking at anyone, her heels clicking angrily on the tile floor in the hallway outside. Freeman approached us. My client wants to continue pursuing this, he said quietly. But between you and me, she does not have a case. The judge made that pretty clear. If you are interested in settlement, we could probably work something out. What kind of settlement? Marcus asked. We drop all claims against Mr. Lawson and void the accumulated fines. In exchange, he agrees to maintain his hives according to best practices and notify the HOA of any changes to his operation. Marcus looked at me. What do you think? I wanted in writing that the HOA acknowledges my right to keep bees and agrees not to pursue any future action based on the current covenants, I said. And I want Patricia to issue a public correction to the neighborhood about all the false claims she made. Freeman winced. The public correction might be hard to get Patricia to agree to. Then no deal, I said. She spread lies about me and my bees. She needs to set the record straight. Freeman sighed. I will talk to her, give me a few days. Those few days turned into 2 weeks of tense negotiations. Patricia absolutely did not want to issue any public statement that could be seen as admitting she was wrong. But Freeman finally convinced her that going to trial would likely result in a loss, significant legal fees, and possibly an order from the judge to reimburse my legal costs under the Colorado statute that allowed fee shifting in cases where HOAs acted unreasonably. The settlement agreement was finalized 3 weeks after the hearing. The HOA dropped all claims against me, voided the fines that had accumulated to over $4,000, and acknowledged my right to maintain beehives in compliance with state law. In exchange, I agreed to follow best management practices, keep my hives well maintained, and notify the HOA if I ever wanted to expand beyond 4 colonies. Most importantly, Patricia had to send an email to the entire HOA membership correcting her previous statements. Marcus and I had input on the language. The final version read, Dear Meadowbrook Estates residents, the HOA board wishes to clarify some previous communications regarding the beehives maintained by resident Yannick Lawson. After legal review and consultation with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, we have confirmed that Mr. Lawson's beekeeping operation is legal, properly managed, and does not violate any local ordinances. Beekeeping is a protected agricultural activity in Colorado, and honeybees are beneficial pollinators that support gardens and landscaping throughout our community. The HOA regrets any confusion caused by earlier communications and has resolved this matter amicably with Mr. Lawson. It was not quite the full-throated apology I had wanted, but it accomplished the goal of correcting the record. The email went out on a Tuesday afternoon, and by Wednesday morning, I had received over a dozen supportive emails and texts from neighbors. Several people stopped by to see the hives and ask about beekeeping. Robert Chen brought over a bottle of wine to celebrate. Emma came over with homemade cookies. You did it, Emma said, grinning. You beat Patricia Hendrickson. Nobody has ever done that before. We both beat her, I said. You and Robert and everyone else who stood up for me. But the story was not quite over yet. About 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, I got a call from Carol at the HOA office. She sounded upset. Yannick, I probably should not be calling you, but I thought you should know something. I am quitting my job. I cannot work for Patricia anymore. What happened? I asked. After the settlement, she has been on a rampage. She is taking it out on everyone. She screamed at me for 30 minutes yesterday because I did not staple some papers the way she wanted. But that is not why I am calling. I found something when I was organizing files. Patricia had me send out fake complaint letters about your bees, the ones from Mrs. Henderson and the Johnsons and the others. Patricia wrote them herself and had me process them as if they were real complaints. I feel terrible about it. I did not realize what she was doing until I found the drafts in her email. My stomach dropped. Are you serious? She fabricated evidence? Yes, and there is more. I found emails where she was pressuring neighbors to complain about you, offering to reduce their HOA dues if they would submit written complaints. It is all documented. I made copies before I turned in my resignation. Carol, that is fraud. That is conspiracy. That could be criminal. I know. That is why I am telling you. I already talked to a lawyer. I am protected as a whistleblower. If you want to pursue this, I will testify to everything. I thanked Carol and immediately called Marcus. He told me to get copies of all the documents Carol had found. Within 2 days, I had a thick file of evidence showing Patricia's campaign to fabricate complaints and pressure neighbors. Marcus reviewed everything and let out a low whistle. This is bad for her. Very bad. She did not just violate HOA bylaws. She potentially committed fraud, which could be criminal. At a minimum, this is grounds to have her removed as president and possibly removed from the board entirely. What should we do? I asked. We report it to the HOA board and request an emergency meeting to address Patricia's misconduct. If they do not act, we can file a lawsuit on behalf of all HOA members for breach of fiduciary duty. We might also want to report it to the district attorney's office, depending on how serious you want to get. I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted to see Patricia face real consequences for what she had done. She had put me through months of stress and cost me thousands in legal fees. But another part of me just wanted to move on with my life. Let us start with the HOA board, I said. Give them a chance to do the right thing. Marcus drafted a letter to the board outlining Patricia's misconduct and attaching key documents. We sent it via certified mail to each board member individually. We also requested an emergency meeting within 2 weeks. The response was swift. 3 of the 5 board members called me directly to apologize and assure me that they had not known about Patricia's actions. They scheduled an emergency meeting for the following week. I attended that meeting along with Marcus. Patricia was there, looking pale and cornered. She had brought her own attorney, not the HOA's attorney, which told me she knew she was in trouble. The board president, a retired accountant named William Morrison, led the meeting. He was clearly uncomfortable but determined to handle the situation properly. We have reviewed the evidence submitted by Mr. Lawson and his attorney, William said. The behavior documented here is completely unacceptable and contrary to the responsibilities of any HOA board member, let alone our president. Patricia, do you have any response to these allegations? Patricia's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She shook her head. I am not making any statement at this time, Patricia said stiffly, but I will say that everything I did was in what I believe to be the best interests of this community. Fabricating complaints is not in anyone's best interest, William said. Neither is pressuring neighbors to lie or using HOA resources to pursue a personal vendetta. This board has a fiduciary duty to all members, and you have violated that duty. Are you going to let him destroy everything I have built here? Patricia said, pointing at me. I have given 6 years of my life to this neighborhood. I have improved property values, enforced standards, and maintained order. And you are going to throw me out because of some bees? No, William said quietly. We are removing you from office because you abused your authority, lied to residents, and potentially committed fraud. The bees were just your excuse. This is about integrity, Patricia, and you have shown you do not have any. The board voted 4-1 to remove Patricia as president, with Patricia casting the only vote against her own removal. They also voted to remove her from the board entirely and to ban her from holding any HOA position for at least 5 years. Finally, they voted to issue a formal apology to me and to reimburse my legal fees from the HOA's general fund. Patricia stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out without another word. I never spoke to her again. Over the following months, the neighborhood atmosphere changed dramatically. The new HOA president was a reasonable woman named Susan, who believed in minimal interference with residents' lives. She focused on maintaining common areas and organizing community events, rather than obsessing over paint colors and mailbox styles. My bees thrived. By the end of summer, I harvested over 60 pounds of honey from my 4 hives. I bottled it in mason jars with custom labels and gave them as gifts to all the neighbors who had supported me during the fight with Patricia. Emma, Robert, and many others raved about the quality of the honey. Several neighbors asked me to help them start their own hives, and I was happy to teach them. The case ended up getting some local media attention. A reporter from the Colorado Springs Gazette did a story about HOA overreach and used my situation as an example. That led to a few other beekeepers reaching out to share their own stories of dealing with difficult HOAs. I realized I was not alone in this kind of struggle, and that gave me some perspective. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia and her husband had put their house up for sale and were planning to move to Arizona. Nobody threw them a going-away party. When they finally moved out on a Saturday morning in October, I was tending my bees in the backyard and did not even notice until Emma texted me to let me know. The whole ordeal taught me several important lessons. First, bullies only have as much power as you give them. Patricia had terrorized the neighborhood for years because people were too scared or tired to fight back. The moment someone stood up to her with facts and law on their side, her power evaporated. Second, documents and evidence matter enormously. If I had not kept detailed records, photographed everything, and gathered expert statements, I would have been at a serious disadvantage. The paper trail I created became the foundation for defeating Patricia's false claims. Third, community support is invaluable. Emma, Robert, and the other neighbors who spoke up for me made a real difference, both legally and emotionally. Knowing I was not alone made it possible to keep fighting even when I was exhausted and stressed. Finally, some things are worth fighting for even when it is expensive and difficult. My bees represented more than just a hobby. They represented my right to pursue a legal, beneficial activity on my own property without being bullied into submission. Standing up for that principle ended up benefiting the entire neighborhood by removing an authoritarian HOA president who had been abusing her power for years. 6 months after the settlement, I was sitting on my back deck on a warm spring evening watching the bees return to their hives. Murphy was stretched out beside my chair, snoring gently. Emma was over for dinner, and we were grilling burgers while discussing her plans to start her own hive. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked. "All the stress and legal fees and everything." I thought about it for a moment, watching a bee laden with pollen struggle home in the fading light. "Not for a second," I said. "This was worth every penny and every sleepless night. I love these bees, and I was not going to let someone like Patricia take them away from me." "Good answer," Emma said, raising her beer bottle in a toast. "To the bees." "To the bees," I agreed. As the sun set over Colorado Springs and the mountains turned purple in the distance, my 4 hives hummed with the activity of thousands of bees settling in for the night. They had no idea they had been at the center of a legal battle. They just kept doing what bees do, pollinating flowers, making honey, and quietly making the world a little better. And really, that is all I ever wanted to do too. The following year brought even more positive changes. The Colorado Beekeeping Association featured my story in their quarterly newsletter as an example of how to successfully defend beekeeping rights against HOA overreach. I got calls from beekeepers in other states dealing with similar situations, and I was able to share the legal strategies that had worked for me. I expanded my operation slightly with the HOA's blessing, adding a 5th hive that I dedicated to queen breeding. I started teaching beginning beekeeping classes through the community center, and within 6 months, I had helped 8 families in the neighborhood start their own hives. Meadowbrook Estates became known locally as a pollinator-friendly community, and our collective gardens flourished like never before. Marcus became a good friend beyond just being my attorney. He started coming over every few weeks to check on the bees and drink beer on my deck. He even invested in a hive of his own at his rural property outside Denver, and I helped him get it started. Dr. Abernathy, the retired biology professor who had been willing to testify for me, became a mentor and friend. She had been keeping bees for over 30 years and had a wealth of knowledge to share. We met monthly to discuss hive management, and she helped me navigate some challenges with mite control and swarm prevention. The HOA itself became functional and reasonable under Susan's leadership. They focused on legitimate issues like maintaining the community pool, organizing neighborhood events, and handling disputes fairly. Several of the overly restrictive rules were relaxed or eliminated. People could now hang wreaths that were not pre-approved. They could park RVs in their driveways for reasonable periods. They could plant gardens without submitting landscaping plans. The neighborhood became a more pleasant place to live. I never saw Patricia again after she moved away, though I heard occasional updates through the grapevine. Apparently, she joined the HOA board in her new Arizona community and immediately started causing problems. Some people never change. As for me, I just kept tending my bees, working my remote job, and enjoying the peaceful life I had fought so hard to protect. Murphy got older and grayer but still loved lying in the backyard while I worked the hives. Emma and I started dating casually, bonding over our shared love of gardening and the outdoors. It was nothing serious yet, but it was nice to have someone to share meals and conversation with. On the 2-year anniversary of when I first received that anonymous note demanding I remove my hives, I harvested my best honey crop ever. Over 90 pounds of golden honey from my 5 hives, each jar representing hours of work by thousands of bees. I bottled it all, labeled it, and took a dozen jars over to the new community center where I was teaching my beekeeping class. "This is what we are working toward," I told my students, holding up a jar that glowed amber in the light. "Not just the honey, although that is wonderful, but the knowledge that you are supporting these incredible creatures and contributing to a healthy ecosystem." Bees are facing so many challenges right now, from pesticides, habitat loss, and disease. Every hive we maintain helps ensure their survival. One of my students, a teenager named Marcus who was taking the class with his father, raised his hand. "Mr. Lawson, is it true you got sued by your HOA for keeping bees?" "I did," I said. "And I won, because I was doing something legal, beneficial, and important." Sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. "That is so cool," Marcus said. "I want to be like that when I grow up." His father smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "You already are, son, you already are." After class, I drove home through the neighborhood. Spring had arrived in full force and every yard was exploding with flowers. Tulips, daffodils, flowering trees, and early perennials painted the streets in vibrant colors. I knew my bees were partly responsible for all that beauty, and it filled me with quiet pride. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Robert Chen standing at my mailbox. He was holding an envelope and waving me over. "This just came," Robert said, handing me the envelope. "Looks official." I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from the Colorado Department of Agriculture, signed by Jennifer Castellano, the woman who had helped me 2 years earlier. "Dear Mr. Lawson," the letter read, We wanted to inform you that your case regarding HOA restrictions on beekeeping has helped shape new state guidance on this issue. Based on the precedent established in your situation, we have issued a formal policy statement clarifying that HOA covenants cannot prohibit residential beekeeping when it complies with state and local regulations. This policy will help protect other beekeepers facing similar challenges. Thank you for standing up for your rights and for supporting Colorado's pollinator population. We are enclosing a certificate of appreciation for your contribution to agriculture in our state. Attached to the letter was an official-looking certificate with the state seal, recognizing my dedication to beekeeping and advocacy for pollinator protection. I stood there in my driveway, reading and rereading the letter. What had started as a personal fight to keep my hobby had ended up changing state policy. Other beekeepers would benefit from what I had gone through. It gave meaning to all the stress and expense. "Good news?" Robert asked. "Very good news," I said. "The best." That evening, I framed the certificate and hung it in my living room beside a photo of my 5 hives. Murphy sat at my feet while I worked, and I could hear the gentle hum of the bees through the open window as they settled in for the night. I thought about everything that had happened since that first anonymous note appeared on my mailbox. The confrontations, the legal battles, the stress and uncertainty. And then the victory, the vindication, and the positive changes that rippled out from my small stand against bureaucratic overreach. If I could go back and avoid the whole mess, would I? Honestly, no. The experience had taught me things about myself I needed to learn. It had connected me with good people like Emma, Marcus, Dr. Abernathy, and supportive neighbors. It had led to positive changes in my community, and even at the state level. Most importantly, it had shown me that ordinary people can fight back against unreasonable authority and win. I walked outside onto my deck and watched the last few bees returning home as dusk settled over Colorado Springs. The mountains were silhouetted against a sky painted orange and purple by the setting sun. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of children playing and dogs barking. Normal neighborhood sounds from a normal evening in a normal place, except it was not quite normal anymore. It was better. Because people like Patricia no longer had unchecked power to bully and intimidate. Because regulations were being applied reasonably instead of vindictively. Because neighbors were supporting each other instead of living in fear. And because 5 colonies of honeybees were thriving in my backyard, doing what they had done for millions of years, completely oblivious to the human drama that had raged around them. They just kept making honey, raising their young, and pollinating every flower they could find. As I stood there in the gathering darkness, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had fought for something that mattered and I had won. I had protected my bees, yes, but I had also protected a principle. The principle that people should be free to pursue legal, beneficial activities on their own property without harassment from petty tyrants. Murphy nudged my hand with his nose, reminding me it was time for his dinner. I scratched his ears and we went inside together. Tomorrow I would check the hives, teach another class, and continue living my peaceful life. But tonight, I would simply enjoy the satisfaction of knowing I had done the right thing, even when it was hard. The bees hummed on into the night, making honey and making history, one flower at a time.